In the previous video, we saw how the vertical or top to bottom layout manager allows you to very simply add fields to a form that flows straight down the page. What we'd like to explore is, and we also saw some options for allowing us to change the exact way that that flow happens by keeping fields on the same line as each other or expanding them horizontally. What I'd like to do is show you a more advanced technique which actually changes the layout manager to a horizontal or left to right layout manager, and this in turn gives us a lot more fine-grained control of exactly how these fields look. The layout manager is defined at the container level, so let's open up the details section, the properties for the details section, and look at its layout tab. And what we'll see is that the layout manager is set to flow top to bottom. What we're going to do is we're going to change that to flow left to right. And that's all we're going to do for the moment. And we immediately see that the fields, instead of being laid, although they appear in the tree just going down the page, because the layout manager says lay them out left to right, they start being laid out, as you can see, left to right along the page. Now, a couple of things to notice is the first thing is that the last name has actually been chopped off. And that indicates that there is insufficient space to fit all of these fields on the form using the default sizes. The default sizes are actually defined as part of the template. When you define your template, each field is given a default size. Now, it's important to note that the layout manager in the wireframe, remembering the wireframe is only a representation of how the field will look, is not identical to the representation that will appear as a PDF. Let's go and have a look at the preview. As you can see, when you're actually looking at this form as a PDF, the last name field actually wraps around onto the following line when there is insufficient place for it to fit on the first line. So it is always important never to completely trust the wireframe. The wireframe is there to give you an indication of what the form will look like, but always test your forms by actually doing a preview. Now let's go into the individual fields and tweak them a little further. What I really want to do is I want to make title and other quite a bit smaller. I want to make first name the next size up, and last name is actually the largest field that I want to, some last names are quite large. So let's go and do that. When I double click on title and go to the layout tab, you'll see that the layout data actually allows me to specify a width as a percentage. And what I'm going to specify here, just roughly, is 10%. Layout fill, by the way, which you remember from the vertical flow layout, is still there. It's largely superfluous for the horizontal layout manager, and really if you specified it, it means a value of 100%, but it's actually overridden by this width percentage anyway, so you can largely ignore it. So as soon as I did that, you'll see that the title field shrinks slightly. I'm going to do the same for other. And you'll see that it shrinks as well. First name I'm going to set to 30%. And last name I'm going to set to 40%. Now, if you've been watching carefully, you'll actually notice that my percentages don't actually add up, and in fact there is no necessity for them to add up. Composer is clever enough to say, well, if your percentages don't add up to 100%, it'll adjust things so that everything works out correctly in the right proportions. Let's have a quick look at what that field, what that layout looks like when you lay it out in the actual PDF. And as you can see, title and other are both quite small, as appropriate. First name and last name are both big, but with last name being about 30. In a ratio of 30 to 40, so exactly what we wanted. So you may ask, legitimately, why do we use percentages rather than just specifying widths in inches, centimeters, millimeters, or pixels? And the answer is, again, for maintenance. So let's assume that at some point in the future, our business comes to us and says we do want to add in that middle initial field. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a new text field between first and last name. I'm going to call it middle initial, and I'm going to give it a width of only 5%, so very small because we're really only capturing a single character here. I'm also going to add one little thing. MI is a little bit tricky, so instead of the tooltip just being MI, I'm going to call it middle initial. So the label will be MI, but the tooltip will be middle initial. Now, because I've added that field in and I've been using percentages rather than pixels or millimeters or inches, that field will bump everything around it around a little bit, and the reality and the result is that when you preview your form, you get that nice small middle initial field showing up with the tooltip saying middle initial. The real beauty here is that we've managed to add a field into the middle of a line of other fields. And because we're using percentages, we didn't have to manually go and adjust or move or resize everything. Everything stays in proportion to everything else, and my form still looks great without me having had to do very much effort at all. One last thing to consider is I knew that I had to have a very small label because middle initial was only a 5% field, and my label also needed to be quite small. If I would actually change the label to say middle initial, that is actually going to cause some problems for my form. And what I'll do is I'll just again go and preview this for you. As you can see, Reader has done its best to display the field the size that we wanted it and try to wrap the text that is part of the label or the caption. But that's actually caused problems. It looks pretty ugly. The bottom line is you always need to preview your layouts to make sure they look right. With something like a very small field like middle initial, there are two options. You can either make the entire field bigger, so give it perhaps 10 or 15% of the space, or do what I did earlier, which is to use an abbreviation for a very small field, or in some cases simply leave the caption out completely and assume that people will either use the tooltip or will find it obvious what they have to type in. So there are a few options from a usability point of view, but the reminder again is to always preview your layouts to make sure that they are actually giving you what you anticipated.